About 8 years ago, an anonymous programmer purchased 2 large Papa John pizzas for about 10,000 bitcoins, worth about $30 at the time. It's believed this was the very first purchase ever made using Bitcoin as a means of payment. Little did that programmer know, however, that at the peak of Bitcoin in 2017, those 10,000 Bitcoins were the equivalent of $200 million. Back in 2010, Bitcoin was only a year old, and for a few years after, it was only worth a few pennies on the dollar. The idea of virtual currency just seems strange. Even today, people are skeptical of it. Personally, I wanted this topic to be an excuse to finally understand what cryptocurrency actually is. While Ethan will be providing most of the detail of how cryptocurrencies work, I will talk about why they exist in the first place. Mainly, I want to understand the context of its upbringing and to help you create a perspective of why people care so much about cryptocurrencies and its future. I'll first talk about fiat currency, next I'll talk about the Federal Reserve and government influence, and lastly, I'll deduce a reason why people are so interested in cryptocurrency. Back in the day, when you took out a US dollar, you used to be able to get an exact amount of gold for it. This was the gold standard. The dollar backed with tangible assets was referred to as money versus the fiat currency we have today. Fiat currency, by definition, is a currency that a government has declared to be legal tender and is not backed by any physical commodity, such as gold or silver. According to Simcer 2015 from the Journal of Financial Crime, quote, paper money, when introduced, was generally backed by current currency reserves of precious metals, giving it some inherent value. When the gold standard was abandoned, the power of the state ensured the paper currency had value. The United States and most of the world adopted fiat currency systems shortly before the Second World War. The term fiat comes from the Latin phrase, let it be done, and a royal fiat was a pronouncement from a king or queen to demand that something be done. Similarly, Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971. The United States thought it could print enough dollars to cover the butter and guns policy of the Great Society and the Vietnam War. While this was happening, the French Prime Minister, Charles de Gaulle, knew we were printing too many dollars and asked for and demanded gold for his dollar bills instead, as promised by the gold standard. Other nations followed suit, and eventually Nixon took us off the gold standard rather than see our gold reserves dwindle. The immediate result was the double-digit inflation rates of the late 1970s. Our fiscal predicament was further amplified, and that every dollar that exists started out as a form of debt to the Federal Reserve. It could be assured that every well-known central bank, at a minimum, owns the Fed. The Fed is not part of the government, like the Treasury Department, but a private organization of which the owners are one of the closest guarded secrets in the world. Established along with the federal income tax in 1913, the Fed controls the printing of money, or monetary policy, via the Fed Open Market Committee. Monetary policy is the primary root of our rising national debt, practically the equivalent of our entire GDP, or gross domestic product. There was no larger distortion event in our history than in 2008. It is no coincidence that the beginning of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and the explosion of printed money began at this time. Currently, governments around the world have printed over $16 trillion in fiat currency. There would have been no painless correction in 2008. Banks would not lend to each other. Major companies like AIG were failing. Lehman Brothers failed. The banking system was effectively frozen. But the cure was worse than the problem. The Fed printed trillions of dollars to fill the bursting bubble. The solution was more debt and more fiat currency. According to Malone in 2012 by the Journal of Cato Institute, fiat currencies lose value over time, which means they fail an important requirement of money, that it serve as a reliable storehouse of wealth. So, fiat currency leads us directly to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrency is brand new to mankind in that it is both a currency and a payment network simultaneously. With the astronomical increase in fiat currency, it may be impossible to link it again to gold and silver. In addition, our Federal Reserve System is completely unsustainable. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies may be the future, not only as a money of the internet, but an immortal ledger of smart contracts with no third-party transactions and complete privacy. In 2009, Nakamoto, the founder of Bitcoin, explained his vision on his peer-to-peer foundation website. Quote, "The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency. But the history of fiat currency is full of breaches of that trust." End quote. Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, very good.